That happens.
Sorry
Sometimes it's
about that.
no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We're good. We're good. Oh man. How you been? Generally
Oh,
speaking.
good, Matt. How about yourself, man? I'm glad you're doing this, man. It's a great activity for these times, yo.
Yeah, no, I've just been you know what? It's like it's I've just been trying to stay busy and and I can't interview myself a bunch. So this is the way to go, you know what I mean? Highlight the community. Okay,
Yeah,
we're
no.
live, and we're joined this hour by Elias Serna. This is very, very exciting. He is a poet. He's a performance artist, a professor. I think he writes some poetry. He's a performance artist,
I played a poet
comedic artist.
on. Yeah.
He played a poet once. All the world's a stage, and this man has played many parts. Uh, Very, 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 very excited to be having this hour. Elias, there's so much to get into, but why don't we start at the beginning? How did you get involved with forming Chicano Secret Service?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, it's not quite the
You
beginning,
know,
but like the beginning of our story.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, to be a little long-winded, when I was a kid, I grew up in Santa Monica, in the working class, underclass neighborhoods. I mean, no one knows that, but except West Siders, like there's little pockets of coronavirus. No, I'm just playing. I hope it's not, knock on wood. But uh, the Pico neighborhood, it's a freeway neighborhood along, in Santa Monica. I mean, everyone visits the promenade and the beach and the pier, but um, you know, uh, our little neighborhood. I attended St. Anne's School, a little Catholic school, almost like 90% Mexican, and the yeah, some friends and I were always cracking up. I always had funny friends growing up. I don't know why. I just I really appreciated humor, and we would always act out little Saturday Night Live skits because a few of my friends and myself, we were like seventh, eighth graders. We used to stay up and watch Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live was a big influence, the really early one in the '70s, and it's kind of political for its time, I guess. But when I got to Berkeley, um, I uh, I was editing a newspaper, not a newspaper. I'm sorry, a publication. It was called Chispas. It used to be the Mecha, uh, Oregon, the Mecha, newsletter, whatever. But it became its own thing, and then it went down. It came back up, and while I was editing, that's when I met Lalo Alcaraz. He got nominated for a little old thing called the Pulitzer uh, Prize a couple like 2 weeks ago. But he
That was weird, but yeah, yeah, go.
yeah, it was a trip. No, I was happy for him. He's a old friend of mine. So we oh, he was a grad student in architecture. I think I was a junior English major. I was in full swing into like being a lit kind of guy, and um, but I was always active. I think another like current in my life is my brother's influence. My older brother, he's a doctor now. He was in Mecha at Santa Monica College. He was the chair. So he's really soft spoken, but he's always had a leadership kind of element. And he used to take me to the Mecha conferences, and that woke me up when I was in high school. I mean, that was kind of rare because in the '80s, that's Reagan gets elected. The whole decade of the Hispanic is the '80s. There's a lot of conservatism, and I mean, I was kind of becoming a Chicano during that time. And so, well, to get to the story, so I had seen Teatro Campesino on video. Um, uh, there was, and then Los Vendidos. There's another one called El Corrido, a really passionate kind of play, humorous but also real emotional. Um, and then the funny thing is, I had seen teatro. I saw uh, it's called Teatro Aslan from Cal State Northridge, performed at a Mecha event at USC in the 80s. I was a high school kid and I saw it, and that had a big influence on me. That, you know, it was just this moment. And then it wasn't like I saw the teatro and I said, oh, I'm going to do teatro. It was just something I saw that was from the kind of like the student Chicano activism of LA in the 80s. You know, a little detail that's important. The funniest thing that happened, and later on, I think I read the play. I think it was the play that was written by the San Diego Chicanas called Chicana Goes to College. And it was about a young woman whose parents aren't really with her going to college and all that. And the dad was the bad guy, and he's yelling at her. She's kind of like on stage looking up, and he's yelling. He was a big dude, and the rubber band on his mask, he was wearing this teatro mask, fell off, and he caught it in his hand, and the whole audience was like, "What the? Like, how are you going to get out of this?" And the actor, I don't know, did not seem staged. She said, "Look what you did. You got me so angry. My mascara fell off." And all of us started busting up. And it was this really beautiful like moment of spontaneity that television film can't capture. You know, it was like live theater, and it had a magical element to it. And that I don't know, that must have stuck with me, because years later, when I was editing the Chispas, we did like three three or four editions. Nick Pacheco, he's like a politician in LA politics. He had worked on the first Mac computers. I mean, this is OG. He was on these early design applications on a Mac, and he used to design it for us and write some poems himself. And Lalo would do writing, and he would do all our graphics, the covers, really nice covers of the old Chispas. And then I was the editor, and I was writing crazy polemical stuff too. And so that's how I met Eduardo. He was a grad student in architecture. We started driving up and down the 5 freeway, because he would drop me off in Santa Monica and go to San Diego. He was from Lemon Grove, and then pick me up, and we'd go. And on these long drives, they're kind of like pilgrimages. We would get real stoned and take all these drugs. No, I'm just playing. We wouldn't, and we would have these creative talks. And on one of the talks, and I mean, even if you'd ask him,
Yeah.
he might agree. Say like I had this idea, let's do teatro, and then he had an idea. He wanted us to do stand-up comedy, and so we're like, it's the same thing. Let's just mesh it together. And it was about. It did have a heavy comedy plan, like our first. I remember one of our first strategy sessions before we went on was like, it's got to be joke, because we did not want to get laughed at on stage. We wanted to be funny, and so we had these. I remember we did like 3 skits. One of them was this Mexican joke about a guy in a bar, but we teatroized it and we Chicanoized it. And then there was one about I forgot, some Hispanic spray. This one that became a classic of ours called Hispanic spray, where if you're too Chicano and you're not getting having successful job interviews, you could spray on Hispanic spray and become anglicized, you know.
So was this
And
before or after Axe body spray? This is like long before that, right? This is like decade before like Axe body.
oh yeah, so yeah, no, we probably, I don't know if the bottom of the shirt has the date. It's we were founded at the San Francisco Chicano Moratorium, and we were at I used to go to the San Francisco moratoriums, and they were at Dolores Park in the Mission, and but that night, the night event was at La Peña in Berkeley. So and it's actually technically, I think, on the other side of Ashby, so it's Oakland. We always say we were founded in Berkeley because we were Berkeley students, and that's where we had our first performance, August 29th, 1988, back in the day.
So this is intended for like a wide cross section society. Can you tell our audience a little bit about La Peña and why that place was so significant?
Oh yeah, geez, I hope La Peña's still open, man, these
Yes.
days.
Well,
Oh really? Yeah,
I
no,
don't know.
that's great.
I mean, before the pandemic, I know it was. I was there not too long ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just reminds me of like Casa de la Raza in Santa Barbara. There's all these news it's
You
shut
know.
down. I mean, and like that place, it's kind of like a self-help graphics of East LA. It's just an OG cultural center founded, during or shortly after the late 60s, early 70s. And it's usually a cultural community center that's you know uh, 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 a space for performance, music, etc. And La Peña was all that, and it had this huge, beautiful mural. Thought it was designed by Malaquias Montoya. It's also kind of sculptural, kind of like David Alfaro Siqueiros style, and uh, and then La Peña is also kind of like uh, there's and it's very typical of Northern California. It's got that like Latin American kind of uh, nueva canción, America's aesthetic a little bit. Yeah, but it was totally also a place where a lot of you know Chicano artists and there's a lot of folk artists there too. But that's where the moratorium event was held at. Yeah, the spaces are important. It's we always, especially in the early days, we always took a lot of pride in saying, our first performances at La Peña, and we're part of that, Berkeley tradition. And the other group that embraced us early on was La Onda Bajita. That was Chuy Varela and El Gavilan Molina, the DJs at KPFK. Over there, it's KPFK radio, KPFA. I'm sorry, getting it mixed up. And yeah, they gave us airtime. We used to do shows, and one time we were up there, and all kinds of dudes were up there. There's a really cool guy. He's a Supreme Court justice. A Supreme. He's a justice of something over in Riverside County, Mr. Blue. He was a Cholo law student at the time, and we met him up there. He was always playing his records. And one time there was a bunch of cholada up there, man. All these norteños and people up there crowded into the KPFA office, and we're like, "What the heck is going on?" And Santana was coming, and he was going to be a guest on the radio, and he walked right through, right in front of us. I think I touched his shoulder, and they went right past us through the little side back door up on the roof, so they could smoke out a little bit before we went on the air. But yeah, man, no, those were fun times.
Yeah, yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the radio show?
Yeah, smoking out with Santana, or what part?
No, I want
No,
to
I'm
hear
just
about smoking out. Then I want to hear about that. But can you tell us a little more about the radio show and what it meant to the Bay Area at the time and what it's has meant? La Banda.
yeah. Oh no, the radio show was on every Friday night. They played a lot of oldies, and it was a Chicano radio show, La Onda Bajita, cruising at the speed of sound, and it was kind of like a cruising uh, radio show, and but it had a political edge to it and a Chicano edge, and we started doing a little bit of a comedy, like Cheech and Chong type of. We'd do our skits on the radio. They seemed to go over well, and they invited us back. So, but that was part of like us getting attention and getting exposure, and then there was another cool brother. Man, his name's slipping me right now, but he was at the other public radio, the campus radio station, KCRW. I forgot. I'm forgetting the anyway. But yeah. And then the way Chicano Secret Service blew up is that we're kind of funny. I think we were once we got laughed at, not at, but you know, we got a response.
Yeah.
We just hit it. We were just constantly trying to come up with more material, more material. And I was thinking about this last night. Like we wrote a lot of skits. There was one time when we were like, how many skits do we have? We're like, I don't know, how many actos? And it was like, man, it was in the dozens. And we had a lot of characters um, and you know, there's a lot of like classic stuff that I wish, you know, and then the Berkeley campus was just really thriving. It was just such a great place because also there was a liberal chancellor and he tried to increase, it was the timing. He used to let in about 1,000 plus Chicanos, Latino students every semester. And so we had a big audience. We had a lot of students that would come out to the Raza recruitment or Mecha social hours and events. And then eventually we're doing protests and high school conferences. Raza Day was a big high school conference. I got to plug in the phone for a moment, but yeah, there was this. I wanted to tell you about this one. I mean, I tell it a couple of times. It was this. There was a social hour moment where I thought it was kind of funny, and it kind of influenced some of our later teatro. Is because we would do our own skits. We wouldn't do anyone else's material. But one time, I had it was the second year, and so we had new roommates, and one of my roommates, George Alva, he was from Carson, Torrance. He was real like, he had this because back in the day it was late 80s, early 90s was disco, you know, the cha-cha girl, the whole disco aesthetic, the metrosexual look. I don't know. This guy had shaved sideburns. He had that really slick, you know.
Now, wait. Did he have like tapered sideburns, or did he have like no sideburns? I know like that
no
period,
sideburns.
and no sideburns. Yeah, the no burn. Yeah,
the no burn.
Yeah,
he had that fade and the little thing on top. A totally disco dude, and he was like a new friend. I didn't know him. He had been a freshman the year we started, so the next year was kind of like a sophomore, real uppity, real big old ham. And he kept saying, "Put me in the skit. I want to do what you guys are doing. I want to be in the teatro." And we're like, yeah, sure. You know, get away from me, kids, bother me. And there was this moment where I like, oh my gosh, we need George. And so it was all gags. We had this show where they wanted us to go on for 30 to 45 minutes, almost like a play, but it was just like stand-up comedy. You know, we're there to entertain. It was a raza recruitment social hour, and so we had these little fillers, and I told you know, I'm a basketball player. I grew up playing basketball, high school ball too, and I always wanted to do like a basketball skit. And I told Lalo, I go, hey, let's do this. It's going to be the MBA, Mexican Basketball Association. We'll just do a little basketball thing, whatever. And then you cut to a commercial, and then we do the Chicano voodoo doll. And so Lalo had this doll inside of a plastic bag. What we opened up the bag, colored it, gave him a brocha, the handlebar, mustache, and a little goatee, and I don't know, maybe painted a Pendleton or something, and put him back in the bag. And we said, so it was staged really well, because during the whole event, this guy George would stand up. Oh, and it was packed, and there was a bunch of people sitting on the floor. wasn't a lot of chairs. And I want to say it was maybe like 60, 70 people. It was a lot of students in this kind of like a conference room type thing. Might have been 100. And we put him right smack in the middle. And he wore like a red, white, and blue type of shirt, stripes. And we told him, you're going to be the Hispanic. And an interesting thing that we did consciously as a teatro, we
Yeah.
called ourselves Chicano Secret Service. We're
Yeah.
influenced by Jose Montoya, Royal Chicano Air Force. We knew him, we adored him, and he it was a war against the word Hispanic because it
Mhm.
was really flourishing in the 80s. And so we would do things like this as part of the war against Hispanic. And Lalo wrote an op-ed piece. He wrote a little opinion piece that circulated widely. Uh, it was it was part of our program. And so George Alba would stand up in the middle of this in between skits, and they were timed, and he would say, you know what, enough of this Chicano stuff. I'm a Hispanic American. I'm proud to be American. God bless America. And people would say, shut up, sit down, sit down. And so he would disrupt the event like 2 or 3 times, and on the third time, right after the basketball skit, that was the cue. He got up and he said, that's enough of this Chicano stuff. You guys are disrespecting the beautiful, United States of America, and I'm an American. I'm a proud Hispanic." And we said, "Okay, hold it right there. And now let's hear from our fiscal sponsor, the Chicano Voodoo Doll." Pulled out the voodoo doll. Lalo pulled it out and he goes, do you have annoying friends? Are there people that just don't get it and are conservative a-holes? Well, don't panic. Get the Chicano voodoo doll. And he pulled it out, opened the bag, pulled it out, and he said, whatever, there are all these lines, and he got the head and he shook it. No, he got an arm and he waved it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and George Alba was in the middle of the audience, and his arm starts waving. And he got the other arm, then the other arm started waving,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then he got his head. He goes, no, 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 no. And George Alba started saying, no, hey, what are you doing? Stop that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then he said, and if you really want it to be effective, you just let them have it. And he he cocked him up and punched the voodoo doll. And George Alba went flying into the audience. And everyone was laughing, and it was a hit. And then we kept going. We always did our funniest skit last, and we did some other skits. And the funny thing is, to cut to the chase, at the end of the event, we're hanging out, partying with our friends, and one of them said, hey man, that was crazy what you guys did with that black magic stuff. We're like, what are you talking about? He goes, the voodoo doll, man. The voodoo doll was a trip. We're like, what? And they said, yeah, all these people in the back, they thought that it was real, that you had really put that guy in a trance. And that's the old, I guess, Brechtian fifth wall or sixth wall. I forgot what it is. But, you put a plant in the audience, and it's, and it throws the audience off. Like, wait, what's real? What's not? And so we always try to play with that, like plants, little things like that. And that was I think that was part of the magic of Chicano Secret Service. For people who ever saw it live, that there was always some spontaneity, like the mask falling off, the voodoo. One of my characters, Che Castro, it always starts off in the audience. And it still kind of has an effect. People are like, who's this communist guy trying to smoke a cigar and asking little kids for lighters? Like, what's his problem? Like Che Castro's like the Heyoka clown. He's the disruptive element in the audience. But like the Heyoka, the clown is supposed to like shift the ground, disrupt our sensibilities, like make us kind of pop us out of like you know, normal behavior and traditions, and you know, try to make sense of it, you know, get mix up the mind a little bit. And whenever I put on the Che Castro character, I and I do it purposely. I just I'm like Dom DeLuise. I just, you know, I just let it. I become Che Castro, and I can't do Che Castro right now because I'm not him. But when I put on the
He's
rags,
on yeah.
yeah, I just go on the trip, and you know, it's always been pretty fun. He also freestyle raps, which I can't do, but he can, you know.
Can he break dance? Does he know all the 5 elements?
Oh, he can. He can do the windmill. He does all this pop locking. He's very versatile. You know, break dancer, pop locker. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, we actually met uh, me and Che Castro at a
Oh
Carlos
yeah.
Montes fundraiser.
Oh yeah. Oh, of course, at the Alexandria Hotel,
Yeah.
downtown LA. Yeah. Oh yeah. That was a trip. That's when they were trying to arrest everybody.
Yeah.
Alex Sanchez and Carlos and Oscar De La Torre. They're trying to lock everyone up this one year. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, what was the writing process like between you and Lalo?
Um, well, I was taking a class on Pulitzer Prize writing at the time. So I was giving him all my notes, and
He's ran with them.
we were just rocking and rolling. You know, I was you know, in Chispas, I mean, I wrote a lot of polemical stuff, but my early writing was poetry. I used to write a lot of poetry too, and there was a character we invented during that time called Edgar Allan Pozole, and you know, those all political poems, and there was this one called Mi Pintada. There was this poem about assimilation, colors, and anyway, but the chemistry was always just you know, an idea, or let's do something. You know, we'd sit down and and it was always just a back and forth. It was pretty creative, and you know, there was a lot of also like I think you know, he was a bit older than me. He might have been like 4 or 5 years older, and uh, there was a lot of encouragement on his behalf of me, and then I was always open to his stuff. I mean, he would come up with some hilarious stuff. It always started off with an idea, and then we just flesh it out. And there was a little, to speak real generally, there was almost always like, oh shoot, we were like cracking up, writing things down, and then there was always this moment, oh shoot, how do we end this? Like, how does this end? You know, it can't just, you know, exit haphazardly. And we had this concept that the comedy gods and Quetzalcoatl would drop a little joke for us to end everything with. And everything always, you know, the early years, I remember like everything was nicely packaged, and there was always like a little cool little end to it. And uh, the, like an example is I had this one idea. Oh, because there was the funniest guy at Berkeley was Stony Burke. He was this older white guy. He brought us on. He had a TV cable show. I didn't even know he had it. And he brought us on, and we performed on his cable show. He was this radical street performer, and he would roll up to the campus and open up a battered suitcase, and he had all these props, horns, but he was mainly like a spoken word comedian. He was hilarious, and he would do things like he's in the middle of a joke, and and he would politicize us. He would talk radical politics, and then the campanile bell would ring, dong, dong, and he would turn into a zombie and start walking. He was hilarious. And then there was another guy at Venice Beach. He was I met him one time at a cafe. I told him, hey, I seen you. You're hilarious. He could barely speak English. He was either Turkish or Egyptian. He was like you know, from the Middle East. I think he had Middle East background, but he was a mime, and he didn't paint his face. He just did all physical humor. And so I remember telling Lalo, I go, hey, I want to do a skit where there's no words. And we did this. It was called La Piñata, and it was funny because we did it. It was just a constant skit we would do. It was part of the repertoire. And then after like the early 90s, it disappeared. We never, I don't think we've done it. Actually, the Cal State Long Beach students, Tony Orozco, my friend who teaches over there, she taught a teatro class, and I taught them the piñata skit. And it was just, I thought it was pretty classic. A guy, a cholo, Lalo would play a cholo with a bandana, the old school Pendleton, and he's all out there mad dogging everybody, throwing hand signs, and then I would come out with a death mask and a stick, just a stick like a broomstick, a piñata stick, and I go out there and I would treat it like a gun. I would hold it like a gun, and he would sense me, and it was funny because the bandana was right at his eyes, so it was almost like he was blinded, you know, by his uh, garb, you know, but by the cholo culture, but it was also part of his tough look. And then and he would see the death mask, the death character, and he'd say, "Oh shoot, the time is here, you know, it's time for me to go." And so he would say, he would cower, and then he would say, "Go ahead, you know, go ahead, shoot me, you know, be all tough cholo." And it was hilarious because people started laughing even at that. They would laugh at the funny, you know, the littlest things. And so then I take aim, I get him, and yeah, you're mine. I'm about to shoot you. It was all no words, and and I'd aim at him, and he would always like twist a little bit, like, "Go ahead, shoot me, I don't care." And so the death guy would have to run around in a semicircle. Then that was the gag, and people were laughing like, "Oh, you can't get a good aim." You know,
Yeah,
I can't get, and then I can't shoot him in the back, you know, because I'm death, you know, I come with
yeah,
dignity.
you
And
gotta be
so
honorable.
yeah, so finally I run up to him and I get him, grab him by the shoulders, and I go, damn it, you know, I'm all mad, frustrated, death is frustrated, and he starts circling. He turns him and then he starts circling him. Then he becomes a kid in the piñata event at the birthday parties. And then on one of the circles, he grabs my gun and he takes it, and then he looks up and he starts trying to hit a piñata, and then he gets near the audience, and I was always scared. I was like, oh, lawsuit, you know, he's going to hit someone and we're going to get a lawsuit. We actually started using a paper sticks because we were scared he was going to hit somebody. Lalo wears glasses, so I was like, I think he's nearsighted or something. And but he would swing at the audience. Everyone's like, ah, and then I try to creep up on him from behind to get him, and then he just turns around and hits me, and then I would have like a big bag of candy, and I would just throw it up in the air and fall down, and that was it. He conquered death, and it was a piñata, and but that was yeah, but see, that was a brilliant ending because we had thought like, how do you end it? You know, it's like, well, the death is the piñata, you know, and we're like, oh yeah, that's great, you know, and
Yeah,
so sometimes the endings would pop
yeah,
down from the sky from
yeah,
Quetzalcoatl.
yeah. You kind
It's
of
all
stumbled.
cracked up.
You kind of you kind of stumbled into profundity there. That's kind of amazing. All right, so so that's you and Lalo. That's Berkeley. That's the beginnings. When does the rest of the crew come along?
Oh, you know, right away, Tomas was in it because Lalo and Tomas were friends from San Diego State. They were in Mecha at San Diego State, and so Lalo came up into the grad program first, and then Tomas came up and he was at Berkeley, and I think he got his master's in ethnic studies at SF State with Angela Davis and Dr. Loco and all them. And so Tomas would pop in and pop into the skits, and Tomas was hilarious. Tomas was like, he was the spontaneity genius. He could kick up lines on the spot, and so and Lalo was pretty good at that too. I never liked that. I liked everything scripted, and so you know, about 2 years in, it's funny because I think back now, and it was only like the first version of Chicano Secret Service was probably like probably like a 4 year journey, and it seemed like a decade, but it was probably only me, about 4 years. And during that time, Dolores Huerta got beat up she got her ribs broken. She got brutally attacked by the San Francisco PD. It comes out in her documentary. A lot of people have forgotten about that, but not us, man. We were infuriated. It was like a Chicano moratorium brutality in our time to see Dolores like that. And those like some crazy, I mean, on our campus, those like, someone said that the other day, because everyone suffers from amnesia. If you don't pay attention, you're like, the LA riots, why did they attack the police? It's like, dude, the police were brutalizing our people. They tried to kill Dolores Huerta in 1990. And even before the LA riots, the uprising of 92, we were on the Berkeley campus, we were not nice to the police. They were not, and the Berkeley PD was poor dudes. They weren't even like into the brutality game. They were just like a small town PD. But when the San Francisco stuff happened, we kind of took it out on the Berkeley PD, and there was always like confrontations with the Berkeley Police Department. The big one was it was on Malcolm X's birthday, a full moon, and the last day of class was the People's Park protest, 1989, I think, and that turned into a riot, full-blown riot on Telegraph. I'll never forget that. And I was in it. I was there. I just happened to be there, and I knew the white radicals. The white radicals were my friends. Not a lot of Chicanos had white radical friends, but those a few groups, we called them the white radicals. And one group was all into supporting the FMLN in El Salvador. And I was always like a little anomaly, but because of Santa Monica College Mecha, I had been schooled on the Central American Civil Wars. We were pro-Sandinista. We're all with Nicaragua's socialist government. We supported the FMLN. We knew about Rigoberta Menchú and the stuff in Guatemala. And so when the white radicals appeared, I instantly befriended them. I'd go to their meetings. They all knew I was Mecha, but Mecha, like 80% of the Mecha membership were disco dancers from San Francisco, Oakland, LA, San Diego, Fresno. We're like disco bunnies, but and we had great parties. But the white radicals that organized they still have a really good publication called Slingshot. It's like an anarchist newsletter. I still see it. I saw it a couple of weeks ago when I was up in Berkeley. But anyway, after the beating of Dolores Huerta really got Chicanos into that antagonism. And there was one time a party, and the police came to shut it down because it was too loud. And they parked a car in the driveway of the Wolf House. The Wolf House was the old Casa Joaquin Murrieta, and that was the party spot for the Chicanos. and the raza, and they were doing construction on the roof, and somebody, I'm not going to say who, I'm not sure who, ran up to the roof, and 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 there were bricks, like there were old bricks, like all stuck together, like a big ball of bricks, and threw it off the roof. Landed perfectly on the sirens and smashed the police car. And I remember it did that, woo, 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 like it broke the siren. And we were like, whoa. And we're like, ha, ha, ha. We're like,
Yeah.
fuck F police. And we were really antagonistic towards the police because of that. They got their tires slashed, and they really got a beating when the People's Park uprising happened. I saw people turn over a police, it was actually an ambulance car in the middle of Telegraph. And then I saw that again at the LA uprising
It must have
about a year.
they must have been controlled by a voodoo doll.
I think there was voodoo, brown, black magic going on. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
So yeah, no, that's a lot. Can you tell us a little bit about Mecha and in that time period and its relationship with kind of like Central American solidarity like organizations?
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, I have like 2 or 3 pictures. I had wanted to pull them up on my laptop, but that didn't work. But we one time we got invited by a group in the mission to welcome the Sandinista, and he's a novelist. God, I'm forgetting his name. Sergio something. He was like a big a Nicaraguan novelist, and he was like the Sandinista Minister of Culture, I think. He came to California on a campaign, on a tour, and we welcomed him. We have a picture of us performing. Another big skit we performed was it's called the Bush speech, and it was George Bush and the translation. He would say his speech in English, and then because they're big now, and they're politicians too. He had biracial grandchildren.
Yeah.
His son,
Little brown one.
the little brown ones, yeah. So
Mhm.
Lalo would play the little brown one, and he would translate for George Bush. It was always that one was usually our last skit, because we had people roll and literally like falling out of their seats with the translation. So I have a picture of me playing George Bush, and he's the little brown one. And there's a giant FMLN flag, no FSLN. It was like a welcome committee for the Sandinistas, and we flourished in that. I think people liked that we were aware of Central Americans' civil war and politics, and yeah. So there were lines like, George Bush would say, "I'm so thrilled to see so many, Central Americans and Mexicans in one room," and then little brown one would say, "Tiene miedo." He's thrilled. And then I really want to engage my world policy, and the little brown would say, "¿Quieres ser el policía del mundo?" There was just a whole series of jokes like that, and yeah, people loved it. And yeah, so we met. I think it's Sergio, not Sergio Elizondo, but yeah, so things like that. FMLN students, the Salvadoran revolutionaries, came to campus one time. We performed with them, and then Berkeley. There was a lot of as it always is. I think Mecha. I know that the whole pedo happened, I think 2 years ago, last year, whenever it was. But there's always been Central American students in Mecha, and 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 even Latin American students. There's a radical roots and currents in a lot of Raza groups, and that was that was part of our thing. And Berkeley Mecha was pretty unique. We were really kind of dynamic. We're doing a lot of ideological battling and thinking, we weren't trying to exclude people. We're really trying to create a movement during that time. And I was the Mecha chair. I was chair for a year. The same year I was chair of the Chicano Secret Service. And yeah, that's another thing. Some friends used to say, "Oh, I know why you're doing Chicano Secret Service. You're just promoting Mecha." And then another group of friends would say, "I know why you're chair of Mecha. You're in Mecha to promote your comedy group." And I was like, "Ha ha, that's funny." I go, "Yeah, yeah, it is. Everyone's right, you know. Like it's part of this. It's all woven together, you know."
So
So
what?
my teatro, yeah, the teatro was totally rooted in movement politics, you know.
Yeah. So why do you think there's so much cynicism about the idea of like, like you're only doing this because of that, or you're only doing this because of that, or this is only happening because of this reason, and if you didn't have a book, you wouldn't care, and da 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 da. Why do you think why are we like that?
Yeah, you know, to be very clear, that was not a major thing. That was it was just something I remember that two sets of friends said, but not really like accusingly. It was minor, but I thought it was kind of funny, but that it was coming in two directions. But um, the other thing is, yeah, I know the pet peeve that I have now at my age is that it's been generation after generation. I remember during the Zapatista stuff, um, the I remember talking to some of the LA people. Are like, "Hey, man, no, yeah, this is like when we were, supporting the Sandinistas and the FMLN." And then someone said, "No, no, forget all that. That was different, That was like solidarity politics. This is like real. We're engaging." And yeah, I know, I get it, but it always bugged me how people dismiss the previous generation or what's recently been done, and say, "Oh, what I'm doing is completely new and revolutionary and different."
Right,
And
right, right.
of course it is. It's organic and it's coming from a place. But sometimes it always bugged me how people would dismiss the predecessors a little bit,
Yeah,
And I'm sure we did a little bit of that in Chicano Secret Service because um, part of our shtick, part of our aesthetic was that we were irreverent, and we nothing was sacred to us. But I
yeah,
think the Chicano movement was sacred, and the spirit, of radical politics was sacred. But people sometimes misunderstood us, and then
yeah,
we were three guys, so we were, uh, there were feminist critiques of us, but you know, um, uh, we could take it. I was I was highly influenced by Shri Moraga. She was my teacher. She was my creative writing instructor. Um, and Sandra Cisneros was our friend, and we worshipped Ana Castillo and her poetry and her style. She became our friend later on. But yeah, no, it was, it's important to listen, I think. Uh,
yeah.
um,
What?
it's not like we're that wise
Uh-huh.
and attentive all the time back in the day, but as over the years, I've learned that, listening is important. And, it comes from also being in the classroom. One of
Here's
my, oh, I'm sorry, say it again.
well, here's the thing though. Like you talk about what happened recently with Mecha, but you're talking about, you're in your early 20s and you're saying teatro, right? That came from somewhere, right? You're confronting people who are also in their 20s and they're saying Hispanic, right? That came from somewhere too. So like everyone around this age range is being influenced by people who are older than them, right? So when
Yeah.
the whole thing with Mecha went down, this idea that it somehow sprang out of the minds and organization of the youth and they were not being influenced by people who were in their 30s and 40s is a lie. They were using the exact same verbiage, the exact same arguments, the exact same whatever of social media influencers and nefarious academics. You know, these people, these unprincipled social media influencers who have names. And I'm not trying to drag you into my fights, so I won't say them. You
I
know,
hear you.
these very unprincipled individuals who you know, these little hooligans, these internet hooligans, these miscreants, um, the miscreants of memes, selling tote bags, going around, you know, just like wrecking balls, just going around causing problems, and that is where a lot of the exact phraseology comes from. So you can't tell me that they, you know, and these people are 30, 35, 38, 42, you know, so these are people that are influencing that little, the coiners of these phrases are also around the same age as me. You know what I'm saying? Like, so like that was, you know,
Yeah.
so the idea that I mean, that no such things ever existed. Like just a bunch of 19-year-olds like having this one idea with no connection to the past. Like that's never happened. Like ever, whether it's good or bad, it's never happened. You know what I mean? There's
Oh
always
yeah.
been we're all links in a chain, whether things are good, bad, mediocre, excellent, great, whatever. We're all links in a chain. So that was a dirty trick played by played by some nefarious characters to say that you're not listening to the youth and you're not whatever, as though it wasn't part of a multi-generational movement to destroy Mecha. It was a multi-generational movement to destroy Mecha, and from there, the rest of Chicano studies. It was multi-generational, and so the defense of it has to be multi-generational.
Yeah. And you know, I never that would be a great investigation because I always I was fascinated. I mean, in a horrible way. Like, how did this happen on the 50th anniversary of El Plan de Santa Barbara and Mecha? How did this destructive gesture, you know, happen? And I know UCLA Mecha was not with it, but you know, I was in touch with some heads at UC Riverside Mecha, and they were all for it. And it just fascinated me that I think it was part of it was time passing, people like not remembering where things came from, you know, because of age, a little bit of political immaturity, and this really, I mean, there's and I think it's complicated, but yes, all these weird things aligned. And you know, I want to point out one thing, and I'll go out on a limb, and but I think it's important to talk about. I've been really bugged by silence. There's these all these elements that silence people, and silence critique. Yeah, and you know, Chicano studies. I mean, we got to come clean and be clear. Chicano studies, it's in itself is a lucha because it exists within a university. And there's no way we can deny the neoliberal forces and energies of a university. And that, you know, sometimes we're engaging in conservative politics. And the whole, there's been a type of destructive element in, especially, and I know, and it's really coming up during these 50-year anniversaries, you know, and um, someone the other day, we had an argument at Santa Monica High School. They were firing Sean Arce, the former director of uh, the Raza Studies in Arizona. And these three female Latinas, like, totally ganged up on him and backstabbed him. You know, he got backstabbed and uh, uh, got kind of forced out of Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. Another thing that's happening, by the way, footnote, is that all the ethnic studies programs that we started in these last couple of years through Raza Studies Now and Ethnic Studies Now movements and the Chicano pop-up, they've been hijacked. Ben Allen, a really strange conservative Zionist, he poses as a like white liberal, but he's really this anti-ethnic studies character in state politics. He hijacked the ethnic studies model curriculum that was created, and I think you know about that. Lupe Gallegos, Melina Abdullah. Anyway, but in Chicano studies, people are so absorbed and you know, infatuated with this, like, um, to them it's a radical critique, and it's an important critique, uh, the intersectional critique, uh, feminism, uh, queer theory, and it's important, and a lot of people do it very well, but some people use that tool to demonize and dismiss the whole Chicano movement, and that's a huge mistake. I mean, and it's hard to express, you know. uh, no one wants to be called anti-feminist, and I'm not anti-feminist. I think a feminist, Marxist, you know, queer theory critiques, those are critical in these times, but to use them in the wrong way to erase or diminish movements, or even derail and try to destroy Mecha, that's so improper. But at Santa Monica, I mean, this one mujer said, we're the Chicano movement came up, and you know, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She said, well, the Chicano movement was sexist, and it's not, it shouldn't be taught. You know, we need to get over that. Um, it's not important. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, the Chicano movement created our jobs. You know, like, how are you so against something that's paying your livelihood? You know, like, then what are you doing teaching Chicano lit, or what are you doing being an ethnic studies teacher at a high school? And do you even recognize the movements that created your job? You know, and I think a similar thing happens in Chicano studies. I mean, I think the critique is important, but it reminds me of something Leslie Marmon Silko said in Almanac of the Dead. She said the stories, she even has this one sentence in the novel. She says, what will the Chicanos and the Indians do? Will they remember their stories? And I want to make a kind of a crazy argument that our stories are getting hijacked, and they're getting used against us. And Chicano studies, some academics and you know, radical theorists are actually trying to destroy our legacy. And I think some of the Mecha students that try to destroy Mecha, you know, were taught by them, and or these stories are not getting proper, you know, like, properly retold. And so, you know, I mean, to take the word Chicano out of Mecha, I thought that was crazy. And Aslan, that deserves a debate. You know, we should discuss the meaning of Aslan. But if I could add one more thing, and I'm sorry to be long-winded. Last night I was binge watching, or the night before, there was these police shows, and FBI files, and it was about the macheteros, and you know, right away they say the FBI located some radical communists, the macheteros, in Puerto Rico, and they had bombed and killed someone, and they killed a police officer. These horrible people. Right away they're demonized, and at the very end, they capture a machetero guy and lock him up, and some run into the mountains and they're still at large. And it says, and the conclusion of the show said, and thanks to the FBI, the macheteros are no longer a major threat in Puerto Rico, and the majority of Puerto Ricans have the freedom to choose their destiny. You know, and I thought, wow, they just hijacked. And you know, what's funny is Chicano Secret Service, we used to go out to UMass. I don't know who loved us out there, but UMass Amherst, I think we went about 3 or 4 times. They used to have a world theater festival we'd go to. And on one of those trips, we were out there in Massachusetts, and we met a machetero. He was fixing a car in the snow. He was under a car in the snow. and he was near I think the hotel we were staying at. We started talking to him. He was a real machetero dude. He told us about the macheteros, and we were like, wow, Puerto Rican liberation,
Yeah.
radical liberation. We also met a Mohawk dude. He was part of the Mohawk militant takeover in British Columbia and Canada. They defended land with machine guns and blockades, and they held off the Royal Canadian Army, and these people, these movements we interacted with were reminded us of the radical Chicano movement elements, and but see, like Leslie Marmon Silko says, those are our stories, the History Channel, the FBI TV show, or neoliberal, those are real malicious groups that hijack who we are, our stories. But I think there's also a hijacking of our legacies through these theoretical movements, and and maybe they're not done maliciously all the time, or maybe it's a little more subconscious, or maybe it's a gesture to theorize the Chicano movement in classrooms. But I think there's an important element that's a great opportunity in 2020. It's the 50th year anniversary of the moratorium, and I'm glad you're doing all that moratorium act, commemoration. The committee. I want to get more involved in that. That's a real important thing, is to take back our stories.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's important to identify the malice of an argument rather than the individual, because most of these people just take up whatever is trendy. Just to be honest, like 3 years ago they were saying something completely different. Consistency is just a rare trait in humanity. Most people are very inconsistent, and they'll go with whatever's popular. And so identifying, I mean, that's just true. So I mean, that's true of our community. It's true. That's true of the world. And so finding, the people who are consistent are rare. So like, identifying the fact that there's a malice in an argument rather than an individual helps you. So therefore, you can like address this person, even if you have personal ties to them. They are taking up this argument of which is just full of malice and full of just disastrous, right? And so I think that's really important. But like, here's the thing. I had Luis Rodriguez on, and there was somebody kind of trolling in the comment section. Like they asked this question, and they were trolling, and just starting to fight arguments, being really shitty to other people in the comment section, and but under the guise of like this radical critique. So here's what I did: I completely ignored them, and then I blocked them. You know what I mean? Because like nobody's above critique, but nobody's above having their critique ignored either.
Yeah.
Straight up. And I've also let people know that if you try and come at me sideways, I will research you and I will come at you sideways. Like straight up, straight the fuck up. And so that's why nobody comes at me. That's why nobody comes at me sideways. Because I mean, like, it's not worth it. You will be penalized. And so once we understand that we're fighting with people and that a fight is a fight, then it's a whole different ball game. It's a whole different ball game. Once we realize that you are trying to destroy something that's important to me, and like, if you continue on this path, I'll destroy you. Like, that's just it. That's and it's just that, and that's the way it is. And then everything shifts. And then everything shifts. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I hear you.
I'm not saying you should do that. I'm not saying you should do that because I'm whatever. But like, I'm saying for me, that's what I've done. That's just kind of what I've done. That's why, like, me and 3 other people formed Telehagwar. It was simply to like, it wasn't just to like create another, left, article and meme generating kind of thing. It was like we specifically see that social media trend influences has been abandoned. You know what I mean? Because people are talking about, forget the internet. The streets are where it's happening. Forget the internet. The classroom is where it's happening. Forget the internet. The workplace is where it's happening, as though the internet's not part of the world, right? So you shouldn't abandon the workplace. You shouldn't abandon the streets, and you shouldn't abandon the classroom, and you shouldn't abandon the internet. So we're like, all right, we'll do this, right? So we'll go here and we'll do this, and we'll try and like emphasize people. So that's why we asked you the 5 questions. We had Lupe, because we want to like highlight certain people that we think are worth highlighting. So people be like, hey, everyone, hey, people, who are like looking to find their way. Here's someone you should be like, right? And like that, and that was kind of like the idea we had behind it. That was the idea behind the 5 questions. And the idea behind the whole project was that we wanted to like create something that was like, that would be like, it is great to be Chicano. It is glorious to be Chicano. You should be proud to be Chicano. You need to fight for this thing, and you owe it to the next generation to fight for this thing, because this thing has been fought for you, right? And so like
Absolutely.
that was kind of why we created Tel Agua, the idea to promote that kind of idea, and not just that kind of idea, that kind of style, So that was it was just, that was why we did it. And I think that there's been so much malice and so much dirt thrown on the Chicano thing because it became a trend and it became kind of hip. And like, here's the thing though, man, like you look at like something like Remezcla, right? Now, Remezcla has all kinds of things you were talking about, these kind of critiques, kind of this, kind of this, kind of that, kind of this, all these
Yeah.
kinds of things, right? But Remezcla is an organization that has celebrated Juan Guaido, that has attacked Evo Morales and said nothing about Inez, that
Oh God.
has attacked Rafael Correa, that has attacked basically all the Bolivarians. This is an organization that celebrated the death of Fidel Castro. This is an organization that ran an article saying that Hugo Chavez was brainwashing children, right? This is also a periodical that was really big and supportive of the Mecha name change. So these people who run Remezcla, where a lot of people get their politics from, and venues like it, are essentially running these right-wing Miami politics that are opposed to national liberation. They oppose national liberation in Bolivia. They oppose national liberation in Cuba. They oppose national liberation in Nicaragua. They oppose national liberation in Venezuela. They oppose national liberation here in the American Southwest. And that's why they attack Mecha. And that's the context. And that's the context of all these attacks.
Yeah. No, that's
national liberation. That's it. And once you look at it that way, all this other stuff is just, it's nothing.
Yeah.
Because if they were so interested in this, right, then why did they make this guy Aaron E. Sanchez kind of the face of the critique of Mecha? Aaron E. Sanchez is a conservative professor in Texas who wrote a paper defending or who was lauding Bush and Reagan for their outreach to the Latino community and condemning Trump because he lost the gains of Reagan and Bush. That was the guy who not only Remezcla, but NPR brought in to like back.
What campus does he teach at?
You seen that research that needs to be done? I've done it. You know what I mean? And so like, and that is why I have no qualms about like going after these people or going after individuals taking up that argument. I have no qualms about it.
What university does he teach at? Does it say? Texas.
It's a community college.
Well,
some of that he plucked out of obscurity. This guy, like this guy's like out of nowhere. Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. That's terrible.
But all it took was like 3 call outs of him, and then all of a sudden Aaron E. Sanchez was no longer was gone. You know what I'm saying? All it took. That's all it took. That's all it took.
But what's tragic is the damage is done. You know, like his voice is out there, and I think what you're doing, Matt, is so important. That investigative, rhetoric and investigation, and calling people out and exposure. I think that what's also, but I still want to come back to Leslie Marmon Silko. Almanac of the Dead had a really powerful effect on me, and that was that she had a notion in the novel that there's spirit energy, there's spirits in the stories, there's spirits in days and moments. So like the spirit of the moratoriums in East LA in 69, 70, 71, like that is still out there. And the story, retelling that story, Armando Vasquez, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting that last name, but a friend of mine, Armando, told me Lawrence told me, you got to bring us out to your classroom because we're still alive. Like the people that lived through those moments it's important to have them. We just lost Bobby Verdugo a few weeks ago, and it's important to get the stories from the people that were there, and not read it in the textbook, or not take the textbook at face value. We need sometimes the text loses the spirit of the story, and it really should be the spirit of storytelling. That's why poetry is so important, because it's a spiritual interpretation of things going on, things happening. And yeah, and there's no spirit in those remezcla takedowns.
No.
They're being sponsored. They're doing that because they'll get patted on the back by their sponsors, and their moderate, middle of the road, neoliberal supporters. But it's a safe thing to do. It's not that risky.
So we have a question from the audience.
Yeah.
Fellow Jaguar, Karina Akripris. She says, "Hi, Dr. Serna. You mentioned that 5 questions from interview from Telejaguar, that you were moved by something your good friend, the artist Sandra de Lolosa, expressed in an interview. The victories are not always won or seen immediately. They manifest over time in future generations. Is it important that the Mepa Mecha battle of last year be similarly documented or expressed in a way that will be preserved?"
Yeah, that's wow. That's interesting. Yeah, I love that quote. That's a beautiful quote by Sandra de la Losa, who was also at Berkeley with us. And Sandra de la Losa, she's had shows at LACMA, and she does these amazing. She also does the Pocho Research Institute. But that idea that the work we do now, this interview, these programs, things said, poems, they don't always have immediate results. Sometimes it's like my experience with the USC Teatro Aslan. I witnessed Teatro Aslan as a high school kid, and then years later, that seed bursted open, and I became part of the teatro movement. So yes, like we always forget that, and maybe it's fine, but it is important maybe to think of things in that way. The Mepa Mecha thing, how it should influence us and warn us of a few things. I don't think we should dismiss that Central American, Salvadoran, Guatemalan voices need to be heard. It's a challenge. Like the Southwest is not 100% Chicano Mexican. It's always about 67%. It's always about 3/4. But but not to get too mathematical, but because of U.S. invasions and interventions in Latin America and specifically in Central America during the 80s, because of Reagan and Bush, I mean that Professor Sanchez should have recognized that about 500,000 people or more were killed during the 80s with U.S. bullets, with Washington bullets, as the Clash used to sing, with U.S. weapons, shot by people trained by U.S. advisors, schooled in the School of the Americas, all having to do with Reagan and Bush. We need that complicated, and it complicates things in the Southwest. That's one way of looking at it. It's a challenge that we as Chicanos, as Central Americans, as Raza, it's our challenge now too. Ironically though, and it's always been my experience too, I have a lot of friends, Central American friends, mixed race friends, Chicanicas, Salvadoran Chicanos, a lot of folks that are Salvadoran that traveled through Mecha. I even have one of my friends here in Santa Monica grew up in the Coyotera and in the big Mexican neighborhood in Santa Monica that's Salvadoran, and she identifies as a Chicana because that's the ocean she swam in growing up. Like in the learning in Chicano studies classes, being in Mecha. So and there's a spectrum of these identities, and they don't have to be uh, uh, conflict focused. I hope I'm clear about this. There will be conflict, just like as there's black and brown conflict. But Central American and Chicano, um, I want to argue that the Central Americans enriched Chicano politics. I love how your homie Ernesto um, from um, from the Raza Unida party posted that old 1980s poster of Chicanos in solidarity with the Sandinistas. It was a beautiful image. I go, that is what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
See that, like reading about the FMLN and the Sandinistas creating their own country for a whole decade. That influenced my dreaming. Um, uh, that informed my radical politics. Like I also am Central American in thinking, and so there's something to learn from it. There's a really rich positive element in the conflict, um, and yeah, and there's also very divisive things, and people were saying a Mexican hegemony. That kind of confused a lot of Chicanos. I was like, what? Really? There is a very strong Chicano current in the Southwest. I don't think it's a bad thing. Maybe it's something folks can embrace, or enrich themselves with. Um, I think to only critique, the Chicano current in the South, I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like
I think,
going to Puerto Rico and critiquing Puerto Ricans as an outsider. Um, but I think it's a challenge,
Mhm.
but it's kind of like the radio show. It's a beautiful struggle. There's a lot of positive, beautiful things to generate from that struggle.
Right, right,
I
right.
hope that answered the question at least in part.
Well,
And you know what? Out of the positive dialogue, there will come, like in the spirit of Sandro de la Losa's observation, you know, um, the seeds we plant now will regenerate, months, years, decades, maybe a century from now.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, like I have Mexican heritage, you have Mexican heritage, and so does George, not George Bush Jr. What's his name? Jeb's kid, right? The little brown one, right? That as affectionately returned to his by his grandfather, right? No community
Yeah,
is monolithic. I mean, like the idea that a lot of these people they act as though they speak for millions of people, when in reality they represent a political trend, right? And so I don't think that the struggles of Central Americans should be ignored. I don't think the civil wars of the 80s should be ignored. I don't think the dirty wars of the 80s should be ignored. I don't think people who are coming in, like bringing those politics to the table, should be ignored. Who should be ignored are people who enter into Mecha and say there's too many Mexicans here. People who enter into Mecha and say, like there's too many conchas and what they say, there's too many conchas and nopals in the room, right? You might as well be calling them beaners, right? So I mean, like that, yeah, that should get ignored. Like you on
yeah,
an individual level can be ignored because you just said some ignorant shit. Like that's like I don't have like I can look at it as an individual. I can look at what you're saying and discern whether or not this is like in the spirit of like changing the world or if it's not. And if it's not, then I'm gonna ignore you. I don't what I mean, I'm not gonna be guilt tripped over it. You know what I'm saying?
right. Yeah,
When like
absolutely.
when you have a character making a phrase like Mexican hegemony, and then on Cinco de Mayo, like showing himself like eating all his French pastries, like I get your passive aggressive bullshit, and fuck you. Like so, I don't you don't owe people like that anything. When someone's full of shit, you don't owe them shit. You know, you don't owe
Yeah.
unprincipled people a principled argument. You know what I'm saying? So like, so that's like my feelings on the argumentation that led to so much of the stuff we've been fighting about, and so much of it's just absolutely ridiculous. And I think that a lot of the tragedy of it is how much we ended up humoring ridiculous arguments because they were ridiculous arguments. Like they
Yeah.
were ridiculous arguments. The things that individuals who were attacking Mecha were saying were ridiculous. Now, I mean, they were just absurd. I mean, you could look. I mean, you can look into them. You can read them. You can take them apart and see like this is not researched. It's not substantiated. There's no facts. There's no dates. There's no stats. There's nothing. It's just these series of interconnecting word games that like connect together, kind of like Scrabble. You know, they're opportunistically thrown together to score points. That's it. And like like that. I know this is supposed to be about Chicano Secret Service, but like we got in this conversation now, and now I'm mad.
Should have Scrabble. We should be throwing the Scrabble Wars. That's funny.
But yeah, so that's kind of what I think. But like so back to you though, Dr. Serna. What's going on? What's going on with you? What's the latest projects you're up to?
Yeah, I'm really into the commemorations. I don't know why. I'm always I'm always uh really uh just absorbed, and I get fascinated by like the circles of time, things coming back, the 50th anniversary of the moratorium, the walkouts, um, and then of course this whole concept of Chicano time, 2019 had all Chicano Secret Service. I don't know if you can see the shirt. Can you see that shirt?
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole quincentennial. I mean, I'm old enough to I'm old enough to remember really clearly the LA uprising and being part of it. There, there's another example of all this hijacking. Like I saw a post and it was like, again, I'm going to sound, I guess, crazy or whatever, but it was very black and white. And that's cool. The Black community was thoroughly victimized in the 90s. They have every reason to say, the LA riots it was us, and the Black community did rise up. It was very violent res- response, and it was properly violent, as it should be, to the LAPD getting scot free from brutally ganging up on Rodney King. But see, it wasn't just that. It was half of the 52 deaths or over half were raza. Over half of the arrests were raza, Mexican, Latino, um, and then the people out on the streets. I think the majority were raza. But it was also every race participated in one way or another. Okay, that's one thing. But see, just remembering the uprising that happened during the 1992 quincentennial year. That was the quincentennial of Columbus. Almost every single, even the woke academics that write about it, it's like, how could you overlook that? The whole planet, but especially the United States, were highly politicized. And this whole thing about Columbus and colonization and civilization and progress and American hegemony, there was a lot of tension around that. And an interesting thing that was happening with Chicanos is that Chicanos were, it's ubiquitous and everywhere now. Chicanos are long hairs, and there's all this indigenous practices and elements and aesthetics and appearance with indigeneity. You know, Chicanos are clearly like we identify as indigenous, and we are, and we're part of an indigenous legacy, a very disruptive one with mestizo colonization and rape and pillage and etc. The race mixing of the mestizo is not a romantic thing. It's a lot of violation and rape and colonization 500 years ago. But the identification with an indigenous struggle and an identity that became very powerful between 1990 and 92. So when the LA uprising happens, you know, no one's really documented this, but tons of Chicanos were involved. And I loved how Jorge Mariscal posted the San Diego State, UC San Diego, Mecha pictures. They shut down a freeway in San Diego. I hadn't heard of that. But see, that's what I'm talking about. The quincentennial was immensely part of the current that made things like the LA riots happen. And let's remember, once the LA popped off, San Diego, the Bay Area, Oakland, New Orleans, Orlando, Florida, and then it goes global, you know. There was a global uprising. And my favorite story, I always throw this in, is some little kids in an African village heard a BBC report that there was a youth uprising globally and that it had started in LA, and they go over and they knock down their abandoned water tower. And I thought that was great. These kids, like, they got it a little twisted, but it was global, you know.
Yeah.
And the quincentennial was important to our waking up. And I think in this generation, it's important to understand there's another quincentennial, and it's when the Europeans come onto the mainland and they attack the Aztecs, and they invade Tenochtitlan, and that's an invasion. I think everyone should know about it and learn about it. And there's all these myths. You know, there's always like this myth of the swift, the Spaniards swiftly conquered the Aztecs. I don't agree with that. I've been teaching my classes these last couple of years, and we spend a lot of time on that invasion, and it lasts about 2 years, you know, and it's 1519 to 1521. This quincentennial is a 2-year thing, and November 8th they arrive in Tenochtitlan, and in May 500 years ago is when the Spaniards massacred the musicians and the warriors at the festival of Tochcatl. So exactly 500 years ago, the Spaniards were massacring the Aztecs. You know, it was literally a massacre, and then the massacre sets off the rebellion. So there's in June next month of 1520 is Noche Triste, when the Aztecs kick the Spaniards off the island and they murder over half of the 400 Spanish soldiers. The Aztecs defeated the Spanish army and put a bunch of their heads on the skull rack along with the horses as kind of like war trophies. And I think that should be remembered, that the Aztecs they weren't defeated swiftly. It took 2 years. And then plus what really defeated them was the plague.
Yeah.
And there's other things that the Aztecs got, the Tlaxcalans and the other groups that were not happy with the Aztecs. And it's complicated. The Aztecs were imperialistic and repressive to outside groups, and that backfired on them, and the Spaniards successfully did a divide and conquer strategy. But of course, the COVID-19 hit, the first wave of COVID-19 hit 500 years ago, and that's coming up in October. So we might actually have, like the second wave of COVID-19, and it's gonna perfectly align with the the first plague that wipes out uh, Native Americans in Tenochtitlan and in the Americas. And it and we should, like, what's that teaching us? What's the spirit of that story? That it's happened before, that we've lived through this before as a people. And so the quincentennial consciousness, Chicano time 2019, Chicano time 2020, 2021. I think it's important to um, own our own heritage, our own stories. Um, my friend Terco Abel from Highland Park told me, well, Elias, what's the likelihood that me or you are descendants of nobility? We're not, dude. Our people were probably making the huaraches on the island. I'm like, true, but you know, I know for myself, I'm of Chichimeca descent, Pame Chichimeca from San Luis Potosi. I'm sure we traded. We were probably subjugated and massacred by the Aztecs ourselves, but we're of that Chichimeca culture, the Nahuatl culture. That's an important thing to resuscitate and rescue and retrieve for ourselves. Yeah, the Pame Chichimecas, we weren't, cutting hearts out for, Tlaloc, but we were, you know, uh, planting corn. Maybe we had chinampa. We had technologies that we all shared, language, uh, uh, deities, spirituality, sweat lodges, etc. There's something to retrieve that is part of our essence. So we first thought, no, I'm just playing. It's kind of, but that should be, it shouldn't be left up to the History Channel or, you know, uh, militia.
Hey, so Elias, you froze on my account. I'm not sure you froze for the audience as well. Can you repeat what you started talking about the History Channel, not be left to them? Oh, we're gonna wait a few minutes here for Elias Serna to return. Uh, well, I want to thank Dr. Elias Serna for his time, and we will. I'm sure we'll have you having more conversations, and we'll catch up with the good brother soon. So, thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned. Alejandro Gadilla is next.